The orchard of second chances. Come on, Emma. It's not that big of a deal. Jess called out, her voice echoing through the rows of cherry trees as she hurried after her girlfriend. I'm sorry. Emma clutched the woven basket in her hands, the rough straw digging into her palms. She shifted it from one hand to the other, trying to ignore the discomfort. She hadn't wanted to come to the orchard today, but the tickets were non-refundable, and she didn't expect Jess to show up after their argument the night before. It is a big deal. Emma shot back, her voice tight with frustration. And the fact that you don't think it is just shows how little you understand me. She kept walking, her pace quickening as she moved deeper into the orchard, away from the families and children running around. She found a quiet spot under a tree, setting the basket down with a huff. I didn't even think you'd come. I came because I knew you'd be here, Jess admitted, catching up to her. She reached out to take Emma's hand, but Emma pulled away, her emotions still raw. She wanted to forgive Jess, but she couldn't let herself, not yet. Jess should have known better than to think Emma would just brush it off. Jess sighed, her voice softening. I didn't realize it would hurt you this much. Well, it did, Emma snapped, reaching up to pluck a cherry from the tree. She had to stretch on her toes to reach it, her fingers brushing the fruit before she twisted it free and dropped it into the basket. And you don't seem to care. Of course I care, Emma, Jess said, her voice filled with sincerity. She moved to the other side of the tree and began picking cherries as well. I always care when it comes to you. For a moment, Emma's heart softened at Jess's words. She wanted to believe her, to let go of the hurt. But the memory of last night still stung. The way Jess had introduced her to her friends, using a word that made Emma feel small, like she wasn't important. It had been a careless slip, but it had cut deep. Yeah, well, it didn't seem like it last night, Emma muttered, yanking another cherry from the branch. She pulled too hard, and her foot slipped on the grass beneath her. She felt herself falling backward, bracing for the impact with the ground. But instead of hitting the earth, she landed against something soft, someone's arms. I've got you, Jess whispered, steadying Emma before she could fall. She tried to help her up, but Emma quickly pulled away, stumbling to her feet on her own. Emma, I'm sorry. It was a mistake. I didn't mean it. You didn't correct it, Emma said, her voice trembling with the weight of her emotions. I didn't realize it in the moment, Jess admitted, her voice filled with regret. Emma scoffed, brushing the dirt and leaves off her jeans. She turned away from Jess, her heart heavy with the weight of their argument. Jess watched her, feeling helpless. She hadn't meant to hurt Emma, but she hadn't realized how much her words had affected her. Emma, please, Jess began, but Emma spun around, her eyes blazing with anger. Jess had never seen her like this before, so hurt, so vulnerable. It made her heart ache. No, you listen to me, Jessica. Emma shouted, using Jess's full name for the first time. It caught Jess off guard, making her feel like a child being scolded. But Emma didn't care. She needed to get this out. Do you have any idea how humiliated I felt? I was so excited to meet your friends, and then you went and said that? How could you? Jess looked down at the ground, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't think it would matter that much. Well, it did, Emma said, her voice cracking. She turned away, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill over. She didn't want to cry, didn't want to let Jess see how much this had hurt her. But the truth was, it had. It had hurt more than she wanted to admit. Jess took a deep breath, her voice soft and careful. What do we do now? Are we breaking up? Emma whipped around, her eyes wide with shock. What? You want to break up? No. Jess said quickly, shaking her head. Of course not. I want to fix this. Emma sighed, her shoulders slumping as she sat down on the grass beneath the tree. She felt exhausted, emotionally, physically. She hadn't wanted to make such a big deal out of this, but it had hurt her, and she didn't know how to move past it. "Are you embarrassed that you're with me?" Emma asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't know what answer she wanted to hear, but she needed to ask. She needed to know. Jess sat down beside her, her fingers playing with the blades of grass. "No," she said softly. "I'm not embarrassed to be with you. My friends already know I'm gay. That's not the issue." Emma looked up at her, her green eyes filled with unshed tears. "Then what is it? Are you embarrassed of me?" Jess sighed, pulling Emma closer. Emma hesitated for a moment, but then she let herself lean into Jess, resting her head on her shoulder. The orchard was quiet now, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. The sun was warm on their skin, but the air was cool enough to keep them comfortable. "No, I'm not embarrassed of you," Jess said softly. "It was just a stupid slip of the tongue. I didn't mean it the way it came out." "Promise?" Emma asked, her voice small and vulnerable. Jess looked down at her, a soft smile on her lips. "I promise." Emma let out a long breath, the tension slowly leaving her body. She smiled to herself, feeling the weight of the argument lift off her shoulders. She leaned further into Jess, letting herself relax for the first time in what felt like days. Jess shifted slightly, turning to face Emma. "And if it helps, I'll reintroduce you to my friends. Properly this time." Emma giggled, wiping away the last of her tears. "As your amazing girlfriend?" Jess grinned. "As my amazing girlfriend. Now, let's finish picking these cherries before we get kicked out of the orchard." Emma laughed, the sound light and free. "Deal." And with that, the two of them stood up, side by side, ready to move forward, together. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm, golden light over the orchard as Emma and Jess continued picking cherries. The earlier tension between them had eased, replaced by a quiet sense of understanding. They worked side by side, occasionally brushing against each other as they reached for the higher branches. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that comes after a storm has passed. Emma glanced over at Jess, who was carefully plucking cherries and placing them in the basket. She still felt a little raw from their argument, but the weight of it had lifted. Jess had apologized, and Emma believed her. It wasn't that Jess didn't care, it was that she hadn't realized how much her words had hurt. And now, seeing Jess so focused, so intent on making things right, Emma felt a flicker of hope. "Hey," Emma said softly, breaking the silence. "Thanks for coming today." Jess looked up, surprised by the sudden shift in Emma's tone. She smiled, a little shyly. "I didn't want to miss it. I know how much you were looking forward to this." Emma nodded, her fingers absent-mindedly twisting a cherry stem. "I was. I didn't expect things to go the way they did last night." Jess sighed, her expression turning serious. "I know. I messed up. I didn't think before I spoke, and I'm sorry for that. I never want to make you feel like you're not important to me." Emma's heart softened at Jess's words. She could see the sincerity in her eyes, the regret. Jess wasn't perfect, neither of them were, but she was trying, and that meant something. "I know you didn't mean it," Emma said quietly. It caught me off guard. I've always been a little nervous about meeting your friends, and when you introduced me as just your friend, it felt like you were hiding me." Jess winced, the memory of her careless words still fresh in her mind. "I wasn't trying to hide you, Emma. I swear. I don't know. I panicked. I've never introduced anyone to my friends before, and I guess I got scared." "Scared of what?" Emma asked, her voice gentle. Jess hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. "I guess, scared of what it means. Introducing you to my friends, it's a big deal for me. It's like, it makes everything more real, you know? And I want that. I do. But I didn't realize how nervous I was until I said the wrong thing." Emma's heart ached at Jess's vulnerability. She hadn't considered that Jess might be just as nervous as she was. It wasn't that Jess didn't care, it was that she cared too much, and that had made her stumble. I get it, Emma said softly. I really do. But you don't have to be scared of that. I'm not going anywhere. Jess looked up, her eyes meeting Emma's. You're not? Emma smiled, shaking her head. No. I'm not. For a moment, they just stood there, the weight of their words hanging in the air between them. Then, slowly, Jess reached out and took Emma's hand, her fingers lacing through hers. Emma didn't pull away this time. Instead, she squeezed Jess's hand, a silent promise that they were in this together. Thank you, Jess whispered, her voice barely audible. Emma smiled, her heart feeling lighter than it had in days. You don't have to thank me. We're a team, remember? Jess grinned, her usual playful spark returning. Yeah, we are. And as your teammate, I think we should finish picking these cherries before the sun sets. Emma laughed, the sound bright and full of relief. Deal. But you're carrying the basket this time. My hands are killing me. Jess chuckled, grabbing the basket and slinging it over her arm. Fair enough. I'll be the muscle, you be the brains. They continued picking cherries, their conversation light and easy now. The earlier tension had melted away, replaced by the familiar rhythm of their relationship. They teased each other, shared stories, and laughed as they worked, the orchard around them growing quieter as the day drew to a close. As they filled the basket with the last of the cherries, Emma glanced up at the sky, which was now painted in shades of pink and orange. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the orchard, and for the first time in a while, Emma felt at peace. Hey, Jess said, nudging Emma with her elbow. Look at that. Emma followed Jess's gaze to the horizon, where the sun was just beginning to dip below the trees. The sky was a canvas of colors, the kind of sunset that made everything feel a little more magical. It's beautiful, Emma whispered, her voice filled with awe. Jess smiled, her eyes soft as she looked at Emma. Yeah, it is. They stood there for a moment, watching the sunset in comfortable silence. The orchard was quiet now, the families and children long gone, leaving just the two of them in the fading light. Do you think we'll be okay? Emma asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jess turned to her, her expression serious. I think we'll be more than okay. We're going to be great. Emma smiled, her heart swelling with hope. I like the sound of that. Jess grinned, pulling Emma closer. Good. Because I'm not letting you go that easily. Emma laughed, leaning into Jess's side. I wouldn't want you to. They stood there for a while longer, watching the sun disappear behind the trees, the sky growing darker with each passing minute. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh start after the storm. And as they stood there, hand in hand, Emma knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Come on, Jess said, breaking the silence. Let's head back before it gets too dark. Emma nodded, grabbing the basket of cherries as they made their way back through the orchard. The path was quiet now, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the distant chirping of crickets. As they walked, Emma glanced over at Jess, her heart full of gratitude. They had weathered the storm, and they had come out stronger on the other side. And as they made their way back to the car, Emma couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of something even better. Hey, Jess? Emma said, her voice soft. Yeah? Jess replied, glancing over at her. I love you, Emma said, her voice steady and sure. Jess smiled, her eyes shining in the fading light. I love you too, Emma. And with that, they walked into the twilight, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next, together.